The following program was recorded at WERC's annual conference in Orlando, Florida. I'm pleased to welcome Supply Chain Brain Editor Emeritus, Jean Murphy.
Hello. Today I'm speaking with Tim Feemster, Senior Vice President and Director of Global Logistics at Grubb & Ellis. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
Today we're going to chat a little bit about supply chain interruptions, and we've certainly seen a lot of those lately with so many natural disasters. Tell us a little bit about the role that risk management has traditionally played in supply chain management.
Good question, because it's evolved over the years. In the beginning, when you talked about risk management, when you had a network that was basically domestically produced product moving 250 to 500 miles to a distribution center from a plant, your issue was just local, very local, so you didn't have really have a big issue. Lots of companies would do what they call business disruption analysis, but that was mainly around power to the plants or power to the DCs and things like that. Today, with a 10 or 15,000 mile supply chain, it's a much bigger issue, as we've seen from the events in Japan and the volcano that came up a few months ago, or a year ago now maybe. And even back in 2002 is kind of when risk management was really brought to the fore in the global supply chain arena. And that's when the longshoremen in the West Coast were locked out from the ports in terms of the processing. And for 10 days, no containers went in and out of the West Coast ports. And mainly the retailers in the United States kind of got a wake-up call, because now all of a sudden, my supply chain's interrupted for an extended period of time. It's not a day or like a power shortage from a thunderstorm or whatever. It's now 10 days. And I've got all my eggs in this West Coast basket, so now I might want to change to what they've gone to now is what they call a four corners or a five corners strategy. So they'll bring containers into the Northwest United States, the Southwest United States, then maybe to Houston and in the Southeast United States into New York. So now they've mitigated their risk, coming through the Panama Canal or through the Suez Canal. So that's when it really kind of started for people to really take a wake-up call. But this latest situation in Japan has really even changed that. So.
Can you give us any specific examples that you have heard of about supply chains being interrupted as a result of the Japan situation?
Yes. I take Toyota, for instance. Obviously, they make a lot of cars in the United States even, not just in Japan. But since the tsunami, they've suspended production on Mondays and Fridays, and they've gone to 50% production on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays because of parts shortages. They just can't get the parts. GM, Chrysler, and Ford are loving this because obviously there's a great opportunity for market share. But the reality is they're looking at all the way till June to determine when they might be able to expand their production. But their comments were that they're not even going to be able to get probably to full production until the end of this year. So now we're not talking about a day or 10 days or a week like the volcano was to go over to Europe. Now we're talking about 9 months. Okay, and that's, again, that's one of those stepwise eye openers again for the industry to say, holy mackerel, we've got now something that's even way beyond what I ever thought about from a business interruption perspective. And so how do we deal with it?
Yeah. Does it make sense to try and protect against, I guess sometimes they call it a black swan, or an event that is probably not going to happen very often?
Well, I think it is, because what we're seeing now with these extended supply chains is there's a lot of handoffs, there's a lot of ways that something can happen. And so now a tsunami is an unusual thing. A volcano eruption is an unusual thing. But when you're importing product from Asia, it's not just Japan that might be affected. It could be China, it could be Vietnam, it could be wherever. It could be even Chile. We had an earthquake in Chile that brought a tsunami to the Hawaiian Islands, for instance. So that's any kind of, they're infrequent, but because we span the globe with our supply chain now, the probability is higher. Mm-hmm. Even though the probability of an incident is lower, the opportunity for it to happen is in more places, so that improves your probability. And the smart companies are trying to build that into their planning around things like 9/11, JIT. Parts couldn't go back and forth between Canada and the United States. Our largest trading partner, Canada, we can't even go cross-border, and all of a sudden plants shut down and things like that. So in a JIT environment, just in time or lean environment, whatever you talk about, you have to look at that strategy against these interruptions.
So in the light of what we've seen in Japan, for example, and what companies might now be thinking about and trying to plan for, how is it changing their strategies?
Well, mainly around inventory and dual or single sourcing. Because in many cases, the products in Japan, in a lot of situations, have been the single source supplier. So if you really are now looking at not being able to get an iPad, for instance, because they're out of stock everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Because they can't get those little teeny parts, from Japan, which is where they make a significant, almost 70% or so of those resistors and things like that are still made in Japan, even though they don't assemble there. They make the component parts. Can't make an iPad without some of the component parts. So you have to now look at saying, okay, do I dual source and not ever single source again? But that means if somebody's got a technology that you can't really replicate in another source, you're stuck with a single source. So now I have to say, what about my inventory strategy? I can't deal with a 1-week inventory as a safety stock anymore. But does it need to be 6 weeks? Does it need to be 8 weeks? And now I have to talk to my CFO about my inventory policy, because if some of these component parts are very expensive, even though they're little, now I'm changing my inventory strategy to raise my inventory level of the corporation, and the CFO typically gets involved in those decisions because that's working capital.
Right.
So.
And it certainly can't be 9 months. Nobody's going
Well,
to.
right. You would never think that it could be 9 months, and you're right. And you're not going to obviously store 9 months worth of a ball bearing or something. I don't know what some of these parts are necessarily, but. Right, you're probably not going to go to 9 months. So then you have to say, what's the probability of it happening? What's my risk mitigation potential? And make those decisions as best you can.
Are companies doing a pretty good job at this now, do you think? Are they getting better at it?
They are getting better at it. And as I said, we've had these events throughout the last 10 years that have forced them to think more about it. I'm aware of one company from a previous job that I had where we were providing third-party services to this company, and they had the position that the single facilities servicing the entire country. And so if you look at that, that's really a high-risk environment. A tornado or something wipes out your building, you can't ship anywhere. Multi-billion-dollar company, right? So our company was on standby, and we have had a situation where we had a big building working with a large owner of properties around the country, and we would bring IT connection to that building. Client pays for it. We don't pay for the building, but the owner has got so much property that if they lease that building, we go to a different building as our backup building, right? And then we spend the money to put the IT into the building so that they could be up and running in just a couple of weeks if they had a major disaster at their facility. And a lot of people are thinking about that contingency planning today. They haven't gone all that way, but they do have plans in place typically when they have multiple distribution centers to say, okay, if Chicago gets hit by a fire, then I can still ship out of LA or New Jersey or Dallas or Atlanta into that market.
Right.
So that's how I mitigate my risk, okay? I really don't change much of my strategy except to understand that I can redirect raw materials or inbound materials away from the affected facility quickly and into the other facilities, but I can still get to that market. It's going to cost me more money, but that's worth, as you said, the probability is so low that some of these happen.
Right.
It's worth to only have the plan in place, but only pay the money when you actually need to execute the plan.
Right. Very interesting. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
I've been speaking with Tim Feemster of Grubb & Ellis. Thank you for watching.